She started vaping at 15. At 22, she has 18 months to live, and a warning the world cannot ignore. I was very naive before my diagnosis and thought that something like this would never happen to me. Kaylee Boda's story is a shattering alarm about the silent epidemic of vaping-related lung cancer striking the young. There is a specific kind of cruelty in being handed a terminal diagnosis at 22 years old. The age most young people are thinking about careers, relationships, and long weekends, and Kaylee Boda of Manchester, United Kingdom, knows that cruelty intimately. She began vaping at 15, a habit that felt at the time like nothing more than a harmless social ritual shared among teenagers. It was not until January 2025, 7 years later, that her body issued its first undeniable signal that something had gone catastrophically wrong inside her lungs. What followed was a harrowing journey through medical dismissal, devastating diagnoses, and ultimately a prognosis that no young woman should ever have to hear. Kaylee's story begins, as so many do, with ordinary teenage curiosity. She had smoked a little during her early adolescent years, the way many young people experiment, but eventually transitioned to vaping, believing it to be the safer alternative that manufacturers and peer culture had quietly implied it was. The devices were colorful, flavored, and easy to conceal, portable enough to slip into a jacket pocket, normalized enough to feel like no big deal. No one told her that what she was inhaling, thousands of times each day, could be quietly scarring tissue deep inside her respiratory system in ways that medicine was only beginning to understand. In January 2025, Kaylee noticed something alarming. She was coughing up a brown substance with what she described as grainy bits. The symptom had appeared shortly after she switched from reusable vaping devices to single-use disposable vapes, a shift that millions of young people across the United Kingdom and beyond have been making at the same time, drawn by the convenience and low price of disposables flooding the market. She sought medical attention immediately, but what she encountered was not relief, it was a wall. Doctors turned her away 8 consecutive times, diagnosing her each visit with a chest infection and sending her home with antibiotics that changed nothing. I was very naive before my diagnosis and thought that something like this would never happen to me. It was only when Kaylee coughed up blood that the medical system was finally forced to look deeper. An X-ray revealed a shadow on her lung, the kind of shadow that stops a room cold. The subsequent battery of investigations, 7 biopsies in total, confirmed what was almost unthinkable for a young woman her age: stage 3 lung cancer. The diagnosis carried the weight of a condition associated with decades of heavy tobacco use in elderly patients, yet here it was, settled inside the body of someone who had only just entered adulthood. One of her doctors told her, with what must have been a mixture of clinical honesty and barely concealed disbelief, that her condition was normally seen in 80-year-olds. The first round of treatment was aggressive and swift. Surgeons removed the lower lobe of her right lung, a life-altering operation that left her with permanently diminished respiratory capacity. Chemotherapy followed, its familiar and brutal toll on the body unsparing regardless of the patient's youth. For a period that stretched through the remainder of 2025 and into the new year, Kaylee endured treatment with a particular quiet courage that young people facing serious illness so often summon. Not from a reservoir of worldly experience, but from sheer defiant will. In February 2026, she received the news she had dared to hope for. She was given the all-clear. The cancer appeared to be gone. The relief lasted weeks. In April 2026, just 2 months after her all-clear, Kaylee was told the cancer had returned, this time in the pleural lining, the delicate tissue that surrounds the lungs and chest cavity. A recurrence in the pleural lining carries a substantially grimmer prognosis than primary lung cancer, and Kaylee's doctors delivered the news with honesty she deserved. She has been given approximately 18 months to live. She is 22 years old. The life she had been planning, the relationships, the milestones, the mundane and beautiful ordinary future, has been redrawn around a timeline no one of her age should have to hold. What makes Kaylee's case so medically remarkable, and so deeply troubling from a public health standpoint, is the type of lung cancer she developed. Lung cancer in individuals under the age of 40 has historically been vanishingly rare, accounting for a small fraction of all diagnoses. The tobacco-related cancers that dominate oncology statistics typically require decades of sustained carcinogen exposure before manifesting. The fact that a 15-year-old's vaping habit could, within 7 years, produce a cancer described by her physician as something normally seen in octogenarians suggests that disposable vapes in particular may be delivering a concentrated chemical assault on lung tissue that science has not yet fully mapped. The chemistry inside a disposable vape is not the simple mixture of water vapor and nicotine that early marketing implied. Research conducted in recent years has identified a range of harmful compounds generated during the vaping process, including acrolein, formaldehyde, diacetyl, heavy metals such as lead and nickel leached from heating coils, and ultrafine particles capable of penetrating deep into lung tissue. Disposable vapes, which operate at fixed wattages without the adjustable settings of reusable devices, may produce consistent and repeated thermal degradation of flavorings and other compounds that creates a particularly damaging chemical profile. Kaylee's switch from reusable to disposable vapes shortly before her symptoms emerged may be a detail that researchers will study carefully. The crisis of diagnostic delay that Kaylee experienced is a story within a story, and it is one that the medical community urgently needs to examine. Being turned away 8 times before a correct diagnosis was reached is not merely an inconvenience. In cancer care, time is tumor growth. Every week of misdiagnosis is potentially another week of spread, another stage deeper, another treatment option foreclosed. The reflexive assignment of respiratory symptoms in young patients to chest infections reflects a structural bias in medicine. Clinicians are trained to expect common presentations in common populations, and a 21-year-old with lung cancer simply does not fit the statistical template that clinical intuition has been built upon. Kaylee paid a devastating price for that gap. Doctors who work in pulmonology and emergency medicine have long acknowledged the diagnostic challenge posed by atypical cancer presentations. However, Kaylee's case, and the cases of other young vapers beginning to appear in oncology literature and public reporting, suggests that the template urgently needs updating. The emergence of a new population of young, vaping-associated lung cancer patients demands that physicians expand their differential diagnoses when respiratory symptoms in young people persist or worsen despite standard antibiotic treatment. A persistent cough producing unusual material in a young person who vapes should now be considered a red flag warranting imaging, not a routine prescription and a dismissal. The broader public health landscape surrounding vaping has been shaped, in no small part, by deliberate industry messaging designed to soften concern and accelerate adoption. The e-cigarette industry emerged from the tobacco industry's long shadow and, in many cases, was backed by the same corporate interests that spent decades suppressing and distorting research on cigarette carcinogenicity. The pivot to vaping was sold to regulators and consumers alike as harm reduction, a stepping stone away from combustible tobacco. For adult smokers seeking to quit, there may be merit in that framing. But the story of vaping among never smokers, particularly adolescents, is an entirely different and far more troubling one. Kaylee never intended to become a public figure. She was a young woman living her life in Manchester, navigating the ordinary world of her early 20s, when cancer transformed her into something she had never asked to be, a cautionary tale. But she has embraced the role with a fierceness that is both heartbreaking and admirable. She has spoken publicly about her experience, sharing her timeline, her symptoms, and her diagnosis in the hope that her story will reach even one teenager who might otherwise pick up a disposable vape without a second thought. Her willingness to make her suffering visible is, in itself, a form of radical generosity. Central to Kaylee's current situation is her pursuit of a clinical trial in Germany that may offer treatment options not yet available in the United Kingdom. Cross-border access to experimental cancer therapies has become an increasingly important route for patients with rare or atypical presentations, particularly where domestic trial eligibility criteria exclude them or where specific therapeutic approaches are more advanced in other healthcare systems. The determination required to navigate international clinical trial access while managing active cancer, the paperwork, the travel, the medical translation, the financial burden, is immense, and it speaks volumes about Kaylee's character that she is pursuing it actively rather than accepting the finality of her prognosis. The regulatory environment governing vaping in the United Kingdom has evolved considerably in recent years, though many advocates argue it has not moved nearly fast enough. Disposable single-use vapes, in particular, became a focus of regulatory scrutiny as their popularity among young people skyrocketed. Bright colors, fruit and candy flavors, and marketing that bore little resemblance to traditional tobacco warnings made them enormously appealing to the very demographic least equipped to assess long-term risk. In 2024, the UK government announced plans to ban disposable vapes, a measure strongly supported by public health organisations who pointed to the disproportionate uptake among children and teenagers.